I'm Danny Thorpe. I'm a local councillor in Greenwich. I was cabinet member for Regeneration and Transport for 4 years before becoming leader in 2018, a role that I finished in 2022. I now work for Clarion as the head of public affairs.
From Ackroyd Lowry, I'm Oliver Lowry.
And I'm John Ackroyd.
And this is Urban Forecast, the show where we talk to the people defining the future of our cities. We discuss their background, what drives them, and the insights they've learned along the way.
This is a podcast for anyone who's interested in how we live, work or play in the cities of the future and what that means for the built environment today.
Danny, thank you so much for coming in. Great to see you. So welcome to the Urban Forecast podcast. This is a show about the people who are influencing the future of our cities. And you have a unique position where both your role in politics and your role in property allow you to kind of influence the way that our cities are being shaped. But if I can start with your route into politics, it'd be great. What first drew you into politics and I suppose into like the world of regeneration as well?
So great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think the thing I'd sort of start with is I was born and grew up in Greenwich, and actually I started life on the Ferrier Estate, actually, which some people now know as the Kidbrooke Village. It looked very, very different when I was there. Went to Tallis. Thomas Tallis is still there on the sort of edge of the estate, and South East London at that time was an incredible place to grow up in. A lot going on. I was 11 when Stephen Lawrence was murdered a mile up the road from where I was living. By that point, we'd moved to the Page Estate in Eltham, and going into my secondary school, that moment really shaped a lot of what I remember about year 7, and there was a lot of police activity in the area, and I suppose a real sense that I started to learn through school about injustice, about equality. I come from a very working class family. I didn't have a dad who was the mayor or like anything like that, so there was no kind of natural way in, and certainly I think by that point I was the first person in my family who'd survived secondary school, let alone university, and Tallis really was my sort of just an incredible place, as an eye into the world, and they taught us so much more about the world beyond the estate where we lived, and incredible teachers, and that was where it began really. I got asked to represent the school in the Greenwich Youth Council, and it was being set up then, and I remember going down to the town hall about 14, 15 years old, building I'd seen a bit in Woolwich but never ever been in, and we got some absolutely incredible opportunities through that. The council at that point were probably the first in the country to really be thinking about youth democracy, youth engagement. We were given a page in the council's weekly newspaper that we were sort of editing and writing. We were carrying out surveys, a full set of elections to get a proper youth council established from schools and youth groups across Greenwich. And I suppose that really sort of gave me my first taste of this is something I'm sort of passionate about and interested in. I didn't do any formal study of politics until I went to university, actually, and I did get in to Sussex, and most people went to Sussex from Tallis, and it was kind of considered like Tallis by the sea, really. But I think by that point, I was sort of looking after myself, and very much just thought, actually, I went down there, and I'd been told, it was sort of Brighton, kind of life by the sea, this will be great. And for anyone who's ever been, it's about 3.5 miles away it's nowhere near Brighton. There's no sea in Falmouth, and kind of actually it looks very different. And I just thought there's absolutely no way I'm going to survive down here in the middle of nowhere. So I came back immediately and thought, right, I've got to get myself into a London university. I want to be in London. Came over to Queen Mary in Westfields. I was living in Woolwich at the time, which had no Elizabeth line. It was quite difficult to get to, so I can't go to Greenwich because that's far too close, so I'm going to stretch myself and go to Goldsmiths, and actually got in through clearing to study politics and social policy, and it was absolutely fascinating place to be, but meant that I could sort of work and sort of stay very much sort of in London life, which I really loved, and then actually I kind of thought, I want to do something with this. I want to get involved in politics. I joined the Labour Party, but I was sort of thinking more than I'm going to become a civil servant. I might consider the fast stream. And then a by-election happened in the place I was living in Shooters Hill. And people said, well, you should definitely go for it, it'd be really good. And I was 22 at the time. And I thought, I might go for the experience of selection and see what it would be like. Got selected, and then elected in July of 2004. In what was
talk me through that election, because I mean, I know you were about to gloss over that, but you are, I think I just said before we started, the second politician that I've had on the Urban Forecast, but also you are not the youngest elected cabinet member. Councillor, because Krupa was, I think, 21, but she describes that election process as a kind of mad dream, going from being a student to suddenly this very quite formal process. Can you talk me through how that felt for you, that sort of feeling almost, I suppose, of a bit imposter syndrome, being basically a student and suddenly having this role?
So I guess because of the work I'd done through the Youth Council, I got some quite good relationships with councillors, with local MPs, and a bit of an understanding of the Labour Party. But I think it's fair to say the Labour Party in 2004 was a very different place to what it is now. Certainly at a local level, some very different characters. And I suppose the thing that sort of I really remember at the point was I had an eyebrow piercing, and someone said, "Oh, you've absolutely got to take that out." And I was like, "This is outrageous! What an insult against my sort of personal rights!" And then, no, like you just will not get elected with an eyebrow piercing. And I did it, and I thought I always felt bad afterwards. I think in hindsight it was probably complete rubbish, but at the time, Shooters Hill was a marginal ward. It was already considered enough for a young person to be standing, so they at least had to look presentable and stand. And the campaign absolutely loved, and Shooters Hill actually hasn't really changed that much in 20 years. I mean, we're in a ward that doesn't have a lot of regeneration, on the borough boundary with Bexley, incredible parks and woodlands, and some real deprivation at the bottom of the hill, and some real kind of more aspirational households at the top with conservation areas and all that entails. So that was a sort of fascinating learning journey, I suppose, into how you represent a place which is very, very different in a borough that was, at a period of significant change and regeneration. The day after the election, I turned up at Town Hall to meet the Chief Exec, and I remember I had jeans and a white t-shirt and sort of slouched in and said, "I'm here to see the Chief Exec." And the security guard, I think, genuinely thought that I was some sort of like imposter off the street and was like, "Well, what
had you put the eyebrow piercing back in for the meeting?"
I was still off, actually. But he, kind of was really kind of shocked, thinking, "Jesus Christ, this is not who I expected to have been turning up here as day one as a councillor." And I think actually the best thing that happened on that day was Mary Ney, who was Chief Exec at the time, said, "Look, this is going to be a really strange and different experience in your life. And to keep your feet firmly on the ground, I'm going to introduce you to 3 normal people." And she used the word normal, as close as I can find to normal within a council, local government setting, who will sort of, give you a bit of background, can be kind of informal mentors, providing advice to you. And one of those people actually was Debbie Warren, who at the time was the Assistant Director for Finance, who I met to talk about, how it all worked and pretend I vaguely knew what all these academic terms meant. And she went on to become Chief Exec under my leadership. So it's really, I suppose, I feel very lucky in a sense to have met some people very early on who actually kind of stayed in the council and actually stayed with me throughout my political journey.
And how long did it take you before you became a cabinet member?
Well, that's a fascinating thing, actually, that in Greenwich at the time, there was a lot of older councillors and there was not a lot of movement upwards. So, I was kind of expected to sit back, play ball. I got a little scrutiny committee, and actually I really loved the work I did on children's scrutiny, particularly around how I looked after children. And, I'd had within my family some care experience of people going into care and systems. It was an area I was really passionate about. And we did some brilliant work, actually. And I remember really thinking, look, as a council, if we can't get it right for the 530 young people who we are the corporate parents for, then like the rest of it, kind of doesn't seem really relevant. And incredible things happen through that. So if we give you one example, we got into conversation with young people who told horrific stories about moving around the system. It's very different now. We're sort of, people talking about moving their possessions in bin liners and things, just awful, kind of institutional stuff. And I said, well, look, one of the things these kids told me is that they never get sent a Christmas card. And I want us to send everyone Christmas cards, because if we are the parent of these kids, you as a parent would send your kid a Christmas card, right? And it was a really interesting thing. The system kind of, we can't have this, and what does it mean? And we said, well, of course we can. We should get some Christmas cards and we'll sign them. They said, what do you mean you'll sign them? Like, surely we'll get some electronic signatures printed. He said, so hang on a minute. I say, imagine you are the parent and you are the child. Would you give your kid an electronically sort of signed Christmas card? This is ridiculous. And I suppose it was really fascinating insight then into kind of how a bureaucracy works and what you can politically do to start challenging that. And then I said, well, look, when I get a Christmas card from my auntie, the first thing I do is shake it to see if a tenner falls out, right? So how many tenors are we going to get to put in? And he said, no, you can't put presents in. And actually I had a brilliant officer in the council who unlocked a relationship with AEG for us, with the people who run the O2, and they gave us 4 tickets for every kid to go and see whatever show they wanted to see.
Amazing.
Which was redeemable at the time.
That's better than a tenner.
Absolutely, a lot better. And the interesting thing is, I think in the 20 years that I've got less than 20 thank you letters, straight up, for kind of things that we've achieved. And you're never in it for the thank you letters, but I got an incredible letter from one of these young people who'd received a card and the tickets and went to the O2 and ended up connecting with their sibling who'd been placed in a different home.
Oh, wow.
Just by pure chance. So those things are real memorable moments, and I think they really helped me understand the way the council worked, who the people were, and what you could do. So by the time I became a cabinet member in 2014, so 10 years after I was elected, I had a significant experience, and sometimes you don't often see that in the current political makeup, where it's not uncommon for people to come in and be cabinet members early on. I've got good friends, people like Roxana, who's the mayor of Newham, who, when she took over as mayor, I think she'd only been in a scrutiny position before, never even an executive one, and taking charge of a council like that, in a very challenging political context was a real eye opener for her. So I feel very lucky to have had that grounding, because then I think by the time I then became the leader in 2018, I had not only really good knowledge, but also some really good connections and an appreciation largely across the officer base of what my priorities were, how I worked, and that made moving forward and into delivery really quite easy in comparison to other places and other people.
It's interesting, I suppose, I'm an architect, and the reason that we do this podcast is to talk to people that tend to be involved in the built environment. I don't know that there's that many leaders who have also done the cabinet, the regen piece, but I think it is something, my experience of leaders is through the lens of regeneration.
Yeah.
Do you think it was helpful when you became leader that you'd done the regen role first? Because I think when you're talking about transformation in a borough, your remit is enormous when you're the leader, and there's tons of things that you have to think about, but transformation, sort of, one of your key tools, one of your levers is regeneration. Do you think it was helpful that you had that grounding as well before you became leader? Massively.
So I remember exactly where I was. So Denise Harland had become elected as the leader. She had previously been the cabinet member for Regen. And actually, Chris Roberts, who was the leader before that, had also been the portfolio holder for Regeneration, and took a real political interest in driving forward regeneration across the borough. So in some ways, there was probably quite an interesting succession there, which was not planned, I have to say, but sort of unfolded in that way. And I remember Denise had won, and obviously went to kind of be leader, and a couple of days later she said, I need to see you, you're in the cabinet, and I'd like to offer you the role of, this sort of pause in her car, and she said, you're going to go into Regeneration. And I sort of looked at her and I genuinely said to her, you're absolutely barking mad, you've made a complete mistake. No, Denise, I can't do this. And she said, no, you absolutely can. And I said, but regeneration is if you're in regeneration, and I couldn't quite get my word out, because I then suddenly realised, well, what is a regenerator? And actually, in terms of, I suppose, the discipline of regeneration, the thing I learned very quickly was there's, the planners, there's the architects, there's the designers, there's the enforcement people, there's the aspirational thinkers, the financiers, and suddenly you've got a whole multitude of people from varied skills and bases that actually you are all moving in, hopefully the same direction around the delivery of specific projects. And actually it's, a multidisciplinary approach. And she said, look, the reason I want you to do this is sort of twofold really. It's obviously one, you sort of rooted in social housing in the borough, some of our, biggest challenges. And by that point, Kidbrooke Village was sort of underway, but, you kind of lived it, you've been there. And regeneration was also, I suppose, a dirty word, increasingly, and was, and politically, there was a bit of a need, I think, for someone to sort of stand up to, some of the people complaining about height who live in £1 million houses, blah, 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 and say, well, actually, this was my experience.
Here. Yeah.
And do you know what, that, I believe first and foremost as well, that regeneration is not about providing, wealthy homes for foreign investors to kind of come and purchase. Regeneration must be about creating opportunities, not just for people to move into an area, but for also those people who are living there and will still live within those communities. And, we had some real, I suppose, memorable moments in that period of time. And Woolwich, I suppose in particular, was, in a real state of flux and change. And we had things like the Woolwich Tesco's, which sort of grew up, which is a substantial development in that town centre. And I remember it won the Carbuncle Cup, and I remember thinking, what a load of rubbish is this? And actually, it's a sort of, it's the worst building in the world. And I just remember thinking, well, it might be the worst building in the world to a bunch of architects, but actually, for the 400 or so local people who've got a job in Tesco's, well, it's anything but, and it was a really, I suppose, fascinating journey for me to go through. And we did some really big projects. So Eltham High Street regeneration was one where, we unlocked 6 million at the time from TfL and the mayor to deliver a high street regeneration scheme. And actually, because I suppose of my rooting, grounding and sort of belief in community development, I facilitated and fronted a lot of those public meetings and workshops, and we did it with residents, with businesses, and brought people together. Same is true of the Plumstead Centre, and actually, the Plumstead Centre was absolutely fascinating, because when I first went into that centre, I remember seeing a sort of cascading waterfall come down the wall, and met some old bowls group who wasn't even from the borough, who everyone was just too scared to chuck out, and no one would say this building is absolutely shocking, and actually our residents deserve so much better than this. So for whatever pain we're going to go through, this is horrendous and it stops right now. And we had a lot of work to do about how we bring both the library and the leisure centre together on a complicated site to create something which was more than a library, more than a leisure centre, a sort of place to come together that would be an anchor really for the community on the high street, in an old Carnegie library, with all of the issues that come with in terms of local listing. And I suppose that was a scheme, I think, that I really learned about, bringing together stakeholders, the benefit of, I have to say, some incredible offices, and Jeremy Smalley in particular, really stands out for me, as he's our AD for Regen, and worked with Pippa, who's the director and the team. But many a cold night, me and Jeremy would be in that library then at the time, sort of talking to residents about what was possible, what were their aspirations, and trying to assure them that this was something we were doing to try and make a difference. We wanted it to be better. It wasn't just kind of more of the same. And I suppose by that point, regeneration in a Greenwich context was being seen of, well, is it all tall buildings like it is in Woolwich, or what's going on the peninsula is a bit kind of terrifying, and we don't want that in Plumstead, because that's got to be different. And actually Plumstead was not a town centre location, it was a high street. So really good lessons for me, I think, for the build-up to them becoming the leader.
What do you think you learned about the discipline of having to work with the private sector? Were there ever any instances where, it sounds like they've got an amazing advocate in you as the head of Regen, going out there and advocating for change and trying to engage communities to support what you and the council believe to be
Yeah.
positive transformation, but in some ways you're sort of doing the hard work for the developer. Were there ever any times where you felt you got stung, by the, maybe the developer not delivering on what was the aspiration?
So, I mean, Greenwich had a history, I suppose, on different schemes other than Plumstead, where we've worked with really big developers. And, I suppose Barclays comes to mind because they've been involved in Kidbrooke and in Woolwich. And ultimately, my experience of Barclays at that point was fascinating because to the outside world, there's a lot of commentary on blogs and social media about, it was all a big Barclays takeover. But, meeting Tony Pidgley was an incredible experience because I thought, well, here's someone else from a very working class background who's obviously done incredibly well for himself, and but still fundamentally the thing I really appreciated about that relationship, I suppose, was you could have a disagreement with Barclays, but you kind of knew where they were and they knew where you were, and then there was just always a sort of a willingness to try and address issues. And I think they'd often get quite a bad press for some of the things that people perceive them to have done, but when you really dug beneath that, and go to places like the Arsenal, genuinely transformed and made incredible places, and I believe respected the heritage of that place. And it can also be hard when you're on the political side of the table to try and get an organisation like that to sort of bend to what you want and your priorities. But I have to say, one of the things I spoke to them very early on about was wanting to make sure that in Kidbrooke, and obviously a place I was very connected to, we used to have Tellerman Square on the Ferrier. Now, Tellerman Square, there was always something going on in Tellerman Square. You had the Wat Tyler pub, which, obviously I was not going into as a younger person all the time, but it was occasional in and out. We had an absolutely brilliant sweet shop that I remember with this sort of glass counter that, you'd always go and sort of choose your penny sweets, sort of go to. You had the dentist, the library, the chip shop. The chip shop had this amazing, I didn't know it was called a rotisserie at the time, but the sort of spinning chicken. You could sort of see it through the window, and your fair share of sort of ups and downers at the same time. And I said to them, look, when we recreate, kind of Kidbrooke, that square and that civic square is really important, because to people who come from the Ferrier, of which is still a significant amount of people who live in Kidbrooke now, that would resonate and kind of mean something. And equally, I know that, when I lived on the Arsenal for a year as a private renter in 2010-11, actually I barely knew the name of my neighbours, let alone come out to sort of play. So we have to build and create something that allows and sort of forcibly brings people into a communal space. And we went up actually to Woodbury Down to have a look at what they'd done up there, which was an incredibly different space, different estate altogether. But I remember that visit, the ground floor of what was going on in this community centre, you just had it all popping off in a way that, was bringing together existing communities, new, there was employment stuff going on, there was some allotments, there was some childcare. And we said, actually, for Kidbrooke, this is a model that we want to sort of bring in. So, we had a fairly blank canvas for the community space that was allocated as a square metre, which didn't on a plan. And we kind of said, right, how are we going to build this? How are we going to operate it in a way that does some of that? And actually, I think we're on the way to doing that with some, initial big successes so far.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think actually the Kidbrooke Village scheme is amazing and keeps going. It's still doing more phases of it now.
Yeah.
I was interested in recently the new leader of Greenwich declaring that the tower block in Woolwich is going to be enforced against, and the developer are going to have to take down, I think, 300 homes or something like that. Were you involved in the sort of the history of that? It must have maybe been granted under the time that you were leader. I'd
so I've done a little trawl, and I definitely haven't missed anything in terms of sort of my responsibilities there. I mean, I think Anthony's been very clear, and he's got a lot of support for saying, look, the fact is this building looks entirely different to what.
It doesn't just look; it is different. It's got more units. It's got different heights,
and
it's not the same building.
You're also missing some fundamental sort of component parts that actually, these things are important, and we have rules for a reason. And I think everyone should make sure that serves as an example. I think that there is absolutely a line, and I think he'd have a lot of support from people to kind of say, look, things like this have to be challenged. And of course, in the middle of a housing crisis, there's not a single person who sort of defend that sort of behaviour without good reason. But from what I've seen, and the legal resolution to that is ongoing. So and I'm not involved in that, so I can't say any more than that really. But I think it is the right thing to do when you have to hold people to account for what they've done.
No, I agree, and I'm sure the resolution won't be to take the building down, but I do think that they'd run out of sort of levers to get these developers to come back to the table.
Yeah, and I also think it really serves as an example of actually, the importance of that partnership work between developers and the council, because if you're ending up in that situation anyway, things have really broken down. And certainly, as an elected member, you wouldn't necessarily be expected to get involved in that level of enforcement by any stretch, but the officers should and would, and clearly there'll be questions to ask about what the applicant has done with our officers to get to this point.
Yeah, and I mean it's a good example of that, as you say, that where regeneration and planning becomes politics. It's that line sort of kind of moves backwards and forwards, and so you'd in some ways been knighted you're the cabinet member for Regen, which has this route into being leader. Were you sort of aware of that, that you were going to that this was a route to be leader? Do you want to talk around that process of becoming the leader?
So there was, from the day I was elected, like a kind of, I mean, it was written in the press and stuff that kind of this was the anointing, which I thought was large bollocks really, but if I'm allowed to say that, kind of actually, clearly it had happened twice, so people assumed that it would, and I certainly think as well, like in 2018, I had absolutely no aspiration to be the leader. It was a kind of, I'm on a career path and that's what will happen. And I think that, kind of by the time I'd done 2 years, because then I became deputy for 2 years before, so I was kind of much more closely involved, I suppose, in like the other things that go on in the council. And becoming the leader is really tricky, because of course, at the same time as you've got your sort of the process of selection, and for an elected model of leader and cabinet, that will be the group of people who turn up after the election itself, to sort of elect you within your political grouping. You're also fighting, which is of course far more important, the local elections, and that's all sort of going on at the same time, and occasionally, of course, party politics does get in the way of those things, but we try and keep everyone sort of focused on that. And then I won. And I suppose the interesting thing was I only won by one vote. It's ironic because I then lost by one vote. But that had also been a bit of a pattern in Greenwich politics over a period of time. And I'd been very clear, I suppose, in the run up to that election of thinking, right, one of the things which really resonated with me was I'd worked in Hackney on the Olympics, and I met some incredible officers there. And obviously Jules was the mayor of Hackney at the time of the Olympics, so he was a huge figure in what had been the transformation of the borough. And actually, sort of advice I got from people in Hackney once I was sort of on the journey and my name was in the frame was like, look, whatever you do, like don't waste a moment. Like every day counts, and sort of go home exhausted and angry and tired, but think, I know that I've done the best of every day. And from the moment I was elected, it was kind of foot on the pedal, and really sort of, I suppose, increasing the pace of the officer group in particular, and kind of saying, look, these are my aspirations, and we are going to deliver.
What were those aspirations?
So council housing was at the core of it, and actually I kind of thought, well, look, kind of if I can do anything, I want to build some council houses. And I suppose what was interesting at that time was, there was sort of mood music on the horizon about funding coming from the GLA, and bits were starting to trickle down, but it was very much kind of an application process. I mean, Greenwich also was in a strange place around some big regen scheme, so a lot of controversy about the cruise liner terminal on the peninsula. So I'd sort of really focused, I think, on thinking, right, I've got to sort of get out, make relationships with people like the GLA, and sort of with a view to unlocking some of these resources. And also we were talking to Pocket, they made an early approach, but actually, we'd like to do some schemes in the borough. And actually, I was very open for kind of, all housing of all types, because, the housing crisis, and I think it's an emergency now, not crisis particularly, but means that, you need different things for everyone. But we said, look, let's get the plan together. We set up a housing delivery board. I chaired the first meeting of that on the Glindon estate on the day I became leader, with sort of, and it was again, a multidisciplinary thing, because that's what I'd learnt work. So I had Director of Housing, Regen, the lawyers, the finance people, some residents actually. Helen, lovely woman, kind of said, actually, look, kind of need you to be an essential part of this journey in making sure that we don't get lost in, the noise. And, I've got my resident experience, but there's resident experience now that want to hang on to. And then we brought some leaseholders in, because actually it was a different perspective. We said, right, we need a plan, we've got to get this together. And very quickly we sort of settled on building 750 council homes, which was odd, because most people in London were like, yeah, I'm doing 1,000, I'm doing, and there was a kind of, everyone was at 1,000. I just thought, I'm not quite sure that kind of you can just arbitrarily arrive at a number, and certainly the finances of our HRA and the funding we were thinking about and the sites that we'd initially identified sort of led us to that number. So it was a sort of calculated, and it was an assumed but then tested position to kind of think we can deliver this. So off we went, really. And we had some real conversations about how we would build those homes, modular, getting the team that you needed internally to be able to deliver that. And really saying...
And were you doing arm's length delivery as per sort of Be First, or were you actually delivering it yourselves as the council?
Delivering ourselves as the council, but with some people building on our behalf, but clearly a multidisciplinary project team internally that led that. The modular stuff.
And were you having to really upskill from the baseline of not delivering anything, so actually having to recruit people?
I think we'd built something like 30 houses in 10 years, and it was like mad, right? So in terms of, and of course by that point, everyone else was off as well. So trying to then get your teams in a market where those skills were suddenly very in demand, and also work out kind of how they were led internally in a way that didn't cause you sort of silo issues, because ultimately we had, for example, one of the things we did was get our own planning resource, which was then funded in that team, locked in to drive that all forward. And by the end of the 4 years, we'd built some homes. Some people within them had done some key handovers. We had all of the permissions in place for the 750. And if you go down to the old Thomas Tallis site now, which was my old school, you'll find the single biggest concentration of council housing going up in the country. So I feel very proud of those things. And of course, what we didn't know in 2018 was that we were heading into a pandemic.
So yes, the question that I was going to ask you is that obviously, halfway through your time as leader, attention must have really been taken off Regeneration, because you have to start the pandemic, and suddenly all the focus of the council's resources must have switched away from that.
They did and they didn't, I suppose. And what was interesting, one of our first sort of few weeks into COVID, we had a real struggle around PPE, as everyone did. And I remember distinctly being in the room. We were having noise from the hospital was completely full. People talking about moving around the system. There's all the stuff around care homes that, frankly, people didn't understand at the time. And the whole of the national system was really blocked in terms of providing what we needed, both at, not just at the hospital, but also at the local level, care homes, social workers, etc., etc. And we said, right, what do we need? Someone said, right, well, we need FFP3 face masks. What the hell is an FFP3 face mask? Well, no, I've never heard of it. And so, well, actually, you can get them in construction, in nail salons. And oh, hang on a minute. So, literally thought, well, let's start messaging people. We're now, and to their credit, and eternal credit, Carl Whiteman and driver, he's the MD of Berkeley, turned up at the town hall the next day in a white van full of FFP3 face masks. They unloaded and basically said, well, clearly you're going to need these at the moment more than we are. And we were literally, and because by that point, all I had left was to ask for help. So I had schools opening up, giving me gloves and aprons, and I remember people thinking it was a bit of a stunt, but like it wasn't, because we were in the room and I thought, right, I started getting email. I got an email from a guy who was a dentist in Thamesmead. He said, I've got a load of stuff here, you can have it. So I drove to Thamesmead and picked it up and brought it back, right? Because well, what else do you do? And I suppose what was weird is, at that time as well was, a lot of people had disappeared, and I was very much in the mindset that, of course, like, we'll absolutely follow the guidance and do what we need to do, but we've got frontline staff here who aren't going home and won't be going home throughout, and therefore actually an element of visible leadership in this thing is going to be absolutely critical, because we can't do all of this on Teams. This is, I'd never been on Zoom, right? But it was completely new to me. So, that I think, really sort of led us into, kind of all sorts of conversations. And then, the regen stuff clearly stopped, but actually in terms of the partnerships, they evolved into different and wonderful things. Greenwich, the O2, for example, one of the first things I got out of the O2 was all of the flour from Five Guys that was going to go off. And we had something ludicrous, like 22 tonnes of flour. And if you've never ever met a woman called Claire Pritchard from GCDA, Greenwich Cooperative Development Agency, my God, she's a legend. They are icons, just incredible. We set them up as the front facing of the community hub, got all the flour there, and we're sort of distributing food from the Woolwich Common Community Centre. And then we suddenly realised that actually part of what's really important was not everyone had the skills to cook and to make things. So GCDA set up these incredible recipe cards of how to make a flatbread. So aside from a tub of Five Guys flour, we're dropping in these little notes about what you should do with this. And that, I suppose, was an incredible evolution of partnership working and things where Greenwich, had really, and I and the team really utilised the relationships that we had and said, actually, we need your help now to do this. And it was the best of people.
What do you think, when you look back, do you think that in some ways that was, I'd imagine it's probably the most terrifying thing going into it. Do you think that was one of the sort of proudest things coming out of it?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. And, I think the thing I feel very lucky about, I suppose, is having worked on the Olympics, and I did the torch relay and the Radio 1 weekend on Hackney Marshes, Jay-Z Saturday night, Rihanna Sunday. It was like top times. I learnt and had significant training and understanding of emergency planning and preparedness and all those things, and Greenwich as a borough had gone through the same with the Olympics. So in terms of the knowledge base that existed, and those were systems that we'd tested, that we were prepared for. We had a pandemic plan, albeit I don't think anyone's pandemic plans quite delivered what they needed to in the end. So I didn't go in eyes cold, I suppose, in some of the challenges that we had. Equally, I was touched every day by things that would happen, and I think in a sense the biggest challenge was going from the leader of a thing with four walls overnight to being the leader of a whole place. So, people at the hospital and the NHS and, well, what should we do about this? How should we talk to people? In some ways, I was sort of leading that communication then to everyone, because, I think this isn't a political point, but I think everyone would say that, the government's communications could have been improved in many levels. And also, the thing I think the government really missed early on is people wanted to know what it meant for them. So there's a lot of guidance, a lot of this at the national level, but how does this affect me in my life? And that was something I thought, well, this is our role really, is to translate these things into messages and things for people. So ultimately, I did feel very proud of what we did. And even though we had some horrific days of, horror that you just would not ever want to repeat, and I suppose the level of death on, a population and a personal level, we all lost people that we knew, was really difficult. But I do look back on that and think in some ways, the amount of emotional development and insight I experienced as a result of that will stay with me forever. And has certainly, I think, made me a better person and a better leader, actually.
And what would you say, your reflections on 4 years as leader? I personally think that local government is constantly undervalued and underrated and undersupported. You know, we're looking at election next year, potentially change of government. What would you say would be your advice for how Starmer should deal with, if he gets into power, support for local authorities, local leaders, local mayors?
Well, the first thing to say is an election this year.
This year. Yes, we are now this year.
The Prime Minister has told us it's this year, although obviously the question of when is hotly debated. I mean, I think regardless of whoever gets into government, the key thing is that, as I said earlier on, this is a housing emergency now. We've got 1 in every 23 children in London who is homeless. This is a scale and a challenge that I never experienced as leader. I mean, if I look back at budgets that I'd done in my time as leader, I remember adult social care was overspent by £6 million. Currently in Greenwich, the biggest overspend that we have is the temporary accommodation bill, which is £12 million and counting. We are paying £800,000 a month to the Travelodge. This is not only...
And that's within the mandatory, isn't it? So you can't. That's one of the ones that adult social care and the temporary housing is ones that
these are statutory services, right? Yeah, so we are duty bound to provide those services. One London borough, who I won't name, told me last week that they've got 150 households turning up and presenting as homeless now every week to their civic centre. They described their civic centre as kind of like an emergency shelter rather than kind of a traditional council office building. And I think whoever is in charge is absolutely clear that housing, I mean, clearly we need more of it in the first instance, and we need more of it in all types. We need absolutely to accelerate the building of social housing, and I think with more than 1 million people stuck on social housing waiting lists, and as my chief exec now says, I think languishing, because I think that's the reality for many, is that they've got no hope currently of, if you're on a waiting list of 26,000 people, you're unlikely to be getting to the top of that in many years' time, and therefore stuck in unsuitable temporary accommodation.
And expensive for the local authority as well.
And also for the country. I mean, when you consider economically how much we are spending on hotels versus diverting that investment into building proper social housing, we've got to get that sorted ASAP because something has gone very, very badly wrong. And then clearly, work is underway on all of the issues to do with the quality of social housing. But I think without stepping back from those at all, because they're vital and essential questions and work to be done, the amount of issues that I often see as a local councillor in the private rented sector is shocking, and that needs far more regulation and far more focus in terms of holding landlords to account to make sure that tenants are being treated fairly and safely.
And so that leads very well onto your new role, your role at Clarion. So I don't know if you want to talk at all about losing your the election to stand again, and then I suppose the new path that you've taken on in the property sector.
Yeah. So I think I would be lying if I said it wasn't hard losing, and losing by one in some senses, people might think is even harder. I suppose the thing I sort of took away from it was, look, it wasn't a sort of a devastating loss, and ultimately, kind of in politics, you do win and you do lose, and ultimately, if I look back at that time, not only did I deliver on what I said around social housing and the commitments I'd set out, I then got us through the pandemic and actually delivered the best set of electoral results we'd ever had. So in terms of a legacy for me as a councillor, I was fairly content with that at that point. And clearly, I think the thing people don't always appreciate then is that there are risks, right? So you're and being an elected leader doesn't come with a contract, it doesn't come with annual leave, all those things. So I suppose my immediate recollection of waking up the next day was, Jesus Christ, got to get a job, right? So ultimately, what am I going to do? And I equally got some really good advice from people who said, you'll get a few offers. And interestingly, I don't think the offers did arrive in the way that perhaps some people think that they do. Or I had a few conversations with people come and work for us, and I thought, well, actually, I don't want to be a planning lobbyist. It's not my bag, and ultimately, I was really keen, I think, to find something which struck with my values and who I am as a person. And Clarion was interesting because I had a friend who'd worked for the previous organisations that had merged into become Clarion, and he's been a really good friend for many years. And I saw the job advert and messaged him and said, "Have you seen this?" And he said, "Actually," I was really thinking about this the other day. I think it'd be a really interesting role for you. So I was like, right, okay, well, I'm going to apply. So I applied, had the interview, and I think the thing which really drew me to Clarion was actually they don't have a single home in Greenwich, so I had no experience. I didn't come with any baggage of this is what it's been like for me, and also I really wanted to have a sort of new start. And I think sometimes it's a bit of a challenge because you then turn up at a new place and say, "Hi, I'm Danny." Oh, it's you from Twitter. Well, yeah, you get a bit of that, and obviously because we'd made a fair bit of noise and impact around various things in the pandemic, I suppose people had a view of kind of who I was. But I thought actually, going to work for the country's largest provider of social housing will be, something that I'd be really passionate and excited about because I've got a huge commitment around social housing. So that felt very much like a sort of natural progression. And I have to say, clearly, people will know that Clarion has had, a lot of national press about various issues that have unfolded. But the thing I'm most proud of, I suppose, is that having gone into an organisation which I didn't really know a great deal about, actually Clarion is full of people who are really passionate and committed about providing the best possible services that we can as the country's largest social housing provider. And I think what I see, in our office today over here in East London, we've got, I was talking to the community gardener who's been out and about, building some allotments today for people. And, thing I really am working on is making sure that I suppose our political stakeholders feel and understand that just because we are a big, very big housing provider does not mean that we should not feel and be local to the places that we're in. And actually making sure that we are connected into those local places, that we understand what's happening and what those issues are is really, really important to me.
Well, I think it's interesting you didn't go to work for a developer. I mean, I suppose Clarion do develop, but they also own a lot of stock, and most of the work I'd imagine in Clarion is supporting that existing stock of housing, those existing people that live within the properties, which sort of brings it back much more similarly to the role that you had before. You are the community facing person. Yeah,
in a different way, I suppose, and particularly kind of with the political engagement and leading that up as I do. But part of what I've set about it since I joined is actually making sure that we do communicate out what we are doing, because when you are under the microscope in the way that Clarion has been in relation to some of the ICV stuff that unfolded, clearly you have to make sure that you're running the best possible services that you can run, and actually what I see time and time again is that we're constantly seeking to improve what we did. I just made some notes because I thought this was interesting, that we get these sort of figures and feedback about kind of how it's gone for the day, and bear in mind that Clarion probably completes just over 1,000 repairs in everyone's homes that we're responsible for every day, spending more than £1 million a day on the repairs, investment and stock stuff. And actually this was Wednesday's figures, and actually in the East region and in the team of people that we've got focusing on our issues with condensation, damp and mould, which obviously has been very much in the news, but at this time of year is much more prevalent in social housing. 100% positive feedback from our residents. Down in Merton and in the north, we had 90% positive feedback, and actually what that meant was 188 people had taken the time on Wednesday to give us that feedback, and that's in no way being complacent, because as a public affairs person, and I think with a political perspective, I'm always really interested in what's gone wrong for the 10%, and actually how do we make sure that 10% is fixed so we get into 100% and continuing to learn and evolve all the time. And that is about some of the deep work and transformation that's happening within Clarion to make sure that, when something does go wrong, we understand how that happened, what then needs to change in terms of a process to fix that, and also then that, the team are trained. I think when, we encountered all of the issues, as everyone did, around condensation, damp and mould, we put a significant amount of resource into bringing new people in, upskilling certain people, but also ensuring that every single person in our organisation of more than 4,000 people knew that if they had a conversation with the resident, went into a resident's home, saw something they were concerned about, they knew what to do about it. We're not just, sitting there waiting for a resident to report a problem to us. So it's been a fascinating journey, continues to be a fascinating one, and hopefully, I'm making a difference for them. And it's great, I think, not just to see, I guess how the agenda is moving around social housing, but also to see the things that we do as a charitable foundation, and ultimately Clarion is a charity. Emerges from the William Sutton fund years and years ago, and how actually as a charity we're not just seeking to sort of turn up as as a landlord. We want to make a difference to the places and the people where we are.
And what does the future hold for you? You're still in politics, obviously.
Yeah.
What, both on the sort of, I suppose, the property side and the politics side, what do you think's next?
Well, I think work is very busy, and Clarion are keeping me busy. So I think, ultimately this year we're really excited about our Clarion 2050 plan, and actually setting out an ambitious series of targets, and really moving the business in the direction of what we need to do incrementally to make the change that we need. So I'd encourage everyone to keep a lookout for that in the coming months, because I think that strategic direction and those announcements will really shape kind of who we work with and how we work over that period. And a lot of us clearly are responding to an ever-changing agenda around sustainability and understanding what we need to do and how we need to behave to deliver on those targets. We're really proud of the retrofit work that we're doing in particular, and continuing that work around decarbonising social housing, where I think we're making a massive difference, and had some brilliant visits down to homes that we've changed in Merton and Tunbridge, and met with what I would say are real people and real residents who are actually not kind of ultra environmentalists, who say, well, actually, if it was down to me, I wouldn't necessarily have known what to do here. I wouldn't know how to go and procure all these things. But what I can tell you is that my home is of a much more reasonable temperature. My bills have gone down, and actually, in terms of some of the issues I may have experienced around damp and mould, they're no longer an issue. And I think, well, we've got work that we want to do there to help drive that forward in the sector and make a big difference. So I think kind of that will play a bigger feature in our life over the year at work. So we're looking forward to that. And politically, I think it's really important to understand that politics is forever changing. So you can never say, never, I'm not going to go and do this, but I'm not on any lists to go and become an MP. I'm not standing for selection. It's not to say that's not something I'm considering in the future, but ultimately, I also feel that when I look around the borough now, and if I'm on the bus or I'm doing a lot of running at the moment because I'm training for 3 marathons.
Wow.
So I've got a lot of miles to get in. I can see places that we've changed, communities that we've changed, council house building going up. So I feel very content that when my obituary is eventually written, there'll be a reasonable...
It might be after the 3 marathons.
Yeah, it might be. Hopefully, touch wood, fingers not. But it'll be a reasonable list of things that I could absolutely say I made that happen.
Amazing. Well, on that note, thank you very much. That was brilliant. Cheers, Daddy.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and give us a review, ideally a 5-star one. And if you want to know more, please go to ackroydlowry.com or follow us on Twitter @ackroydlowry and Instagram with the same. This podcast supports LandAid, the property industry charity that brings together the sector to deliver life-changing projects for young people who really need it. Visit www.landaid.org to find out how you can help end youth homelessness.